This as Democrats continue to insist, including on our program, that they will let all Bush-era tax cuts expire, potentially, could happen, unless Republicans compromise. Brings us to Senator Richard Blumenthal. He's a Democrat from Connecticut. He was Connecticut's former Attorney General. Nice to see you again, sir. Thanks for being with us. You heard Ben Bernanke there just a moment ago, and his basic message in a nutshell, if I can paraphrase, was do something, but he didn't exactly say what Congress should be doing. What should Congress be doing right now?
Congress should be passing an extension of the tax cuts for the middle class, anybody in those families earning $250,000 or less. That would provide some certainty and stability, which is exactly what Ben Bernanke says should happen, so that we can have some long-term sustainability as well as aiding our fragile recovery. Passing the measure that would extend those tax cuts for households earning less than $250,000 is what we need to do now.
So Dick Durbin, when I was speaking to Senator Durbin, when I was speaking to him yesterday, says we should do what Senator Patty Murray suggests, which is let these Bush-era tax cuts expire, because then afterward you could go ahead and reinstate tax cuts, cut the taxes for people in that category, $250,000 or less. Here's what he told me yesterday.
We have to have this day of reckoning in order to finally break through and have meaningful deficit reduction that still creates a growing economy. Then let's face it.
Well, what does that mean? Because does that mean that you're saying that if we have to have a day of reckoning, that in fact you'd let them expire, which then would raise the taxes for those middle class people you just said you don't want to raise taxes on?
That's a very real possibility unless there's an agreement. But people of goodwill in both political parties should avoid that. I want to work to avoid it.
Let me. What do you think of that strategy? It seems like it could be fraught with risk.
I think all of our first choice is to have the extension of the tax cuts passed now, because the markets, as well as those middle-class families, really deserve and need the certainty of extending the tax cuts for them, for the middle-class families. And that's the first choice. If for some reason of political strategy a delay is necessary, of course we would consider it. But really what we need not only is to pass those tax cuts, but also to close the loopholes that will produce additional revenue. Loopholes like the ones that reward companies for shipping jobs overseas. We will vote this week or next on a measure called Bring the Jobs Home, which provides 20% tax credit incentives for companies to invest in jobs here, in the offshoring, and discourage shipping jobs overseas by closing tax loopholes that actually cost our taxpayers. So there are loopholes and tax breaks we can end that will produce additional revenue even as we extend the tax cuts for households earning less than $250,000. My preference is to do those measures now for all the reasons that Ben Bernanke has said so well.
What if you're stuck in a position, which I think very much could happen, which is you have two options. You can either extend the Bush-era tax cuts for all, or you could let them expire for all. What would you do?
My preference and my belief that the American public would be best served by the option that we extend the tax cuts for households earning less than $250,000 now. I would consider at some later point, perhaps, additional measures that would provide relief for families that earn more than $250,000.
But that kind of wasn't my question, as you know. That wasn't exactly my question, right? I said if you're between a rock and a hard place and you have two options, one is to let the tax cuts expire or to extend them for everybody, which might be your options, which would you choose? Because it sounded like yesterday when talking to Senator Durbin and others that really could come down to being the choice.
My preference is to extend tax cuts because I think that fiscal cliff is so ominous and so potentially destructive that we need to avoid it. But we also need to address the needs for cuts in spending. And I think a balanced approach is the optimal way to go, and ultimately one that I think should attract a bipartisan coalition.
Do you think that bipartisan coalition cannot possibly happen until after the election?
Preferably before the election, but certainly before the end of the year. If it has to be done after the election, but before January 1st, that would be the best way to go.
Senator Richard Blumenthal joining me this morning. Nice to see you, sir. Thanks for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
You bet.